Out of This World is one of the earliest science fiction anthologies created by a UK broadcaster. There are a few American anthologies out there, such as Tales of Tomorrow, Science Fiction Theatre, The Twilight Zone, and Way Out, but Out of This World is special for quite a few reasons. It was broadcast on ITV from their ABC production company from the 30th of June to the 22nd of September 1962, as a spin-off of the acclaimed Armchair Theatre. Similar to the American horror anthology Thriller that had also used him, famed actor Boris Karloff was hired to host each episode within the confines of his character's bizarre console room. Producer Leonard White described the 75-year-old chiller icon as having a certain otherworldliness that was perfect for the show. The idea was also apparently pinched from Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. The series included short story adaptations from acclaimed authors such as Isaac Asimov, Philip K. Dick, and Clifford D. Simak. Series creator Irene Shubik joined ABC Television as a story editor for Armchair Theatre in 1960, becoming affiliated with future Doctor Who creator Sidney Newman. A fan of science fiction spanning back to her university days, and having commissioned science fiction tinged scripts for Armchair in The Omega Mystery and The Ship That Couldn't Stop, Shubik proposed the idea of a science fiction spin-off of the show in a similar vein to the crime mystery spin-off Armchair Mystery Theatre. The production that acted as a template for what would become Out of This World was Murder Club, an adaptation of Robert Sheckley's short story The Seventh Victim. ABC seemed to think that it was a good idea, especially since the BBC had just scored a notable hit with the science fiction thriller A for Andromeda, but that's another unfortunate story for a different video. Shubik was credited as the creator and script editor for the series, while White was appointed producer, a man who had produced the first 2 seasons of the iconic The Avengers series. Although having hated his time working on such a manic show with a demanding schedule, he described Out of This World as a more positive experience that allowed the production team and audience to explore the uncertainties and unrealities of tomorrow. Each episode was given a modest budget of £5,000. Shubik initially had problems trying to find suitable stories to adapt that wouldn't blow the budget through the roof or just be impossible at the time to create in a faithful way. Fortunately, John Carnell was in her address book. He was a key figure in British science fiction, founder of the magazine New Worlds, and agent for many British science fiction authors. Carnell assisted Shubik in selecting material and put her in contact with writers and publishers. Carnell also promoted the series heavily in New Worlds, putting it on the cover of the 1962 July edition. When a strike by Actors Union Equity hit production of Armchair Theatre, it was a blessing in disguise as it gave Shubik the extra time she needed to find sufficient scripts. All but 2 episodes were adaptations of short stories and novels, those being Botany Bay and Vanishing Act. Shubik took the name Out of This World from a series of anthology collections published by Blackie and Son, edited by Amabel Williams Ellis. Yes, Amabel, not Annabelle. Crazy, right? 3 scripts for Out of This World, adaptations of Philip K. Dick's Imposter and Clifford D. Simak's Immigrant, as well as the original story Botany Bay, were supplied by Terry Nation, who would a very short time after create the Daleks for Doctor Who. Nation's scripts were his first professional foray into science fiction, the genre for which he would become best known for and closely associated with. Apart from a number of scripts for Doctor Who, Nation would go on to create the original science fiction series Survivors and Blake 7, and even attempted to get the Daleks their own spin-off series in America before the project ultimately fell through. This unproduced script, titled The Destroyers, would be adapted as a radio drama some years later in 2010, keeping its legacy alive. Sorry, Doctor Who chatter. "13 episodes were broadcast at 10 p.m. from the 30th of June. One episode, Dumb Martian, based on the short story by John Wyndham, was produced by the same production team, but, presumably in order to give the show even more traction, it was instead aired as Episode 0 under the Armchair Theatre banner, with a brief epilogue hosted by Karloff introducing viewers to a brand new series set to air the following week. It was a ratings success, with the first official episode, The Yellow Pill, being watched by over 11 million viewers, beating BBC's popular long-running series Z-Cars. Critical reaction to Out of This World was, on the whole, very positive. A Kinematograph Weekly review said that the series was the most intelligent and best written of its genre since Quatermass, while The Times said, in general, the level of writing and direction has been encouragingly high. Out of This World may well help to banish forever the view of the summer as a time when just anything will do. H.F. Hall, writing in the Yorkshire Evening Post, described Out of This World as the most accomplished thing of its kind that TV has yet produced. Well-schemed scripting and disciplined production. One viewer who enjoyed the series was The Goon Show's Michael Benteen, who sent a telegram to Leonard White conveying joyous congratulations and wonderful entertainment. Shubik's contention that science fiction should have relevance in contemporary life was noted by the Sunday Times, with Peter Lorre stating that the series was good at making viewers think about themselves and societies from the outside, making us as people realise that what we often assume is immutable is, in fact, only an adaptation to the very particular circumstances of our world. He went on to say, soon, whether by technical development or atomic war or space travel, our civilization is going to be faced with new problems on a vast scale. For Shubik and White, producing a science fiction anthology with adult themes and tackling serious issues, despite occasionally being described as quite grim, paid off. But what do I think of the series? Well, unfortunately, that's quite difficult for me to say. Of the 13 or 14 episodes, if you include Dumb Martian, only one, yes, one, is known to exist. That being the adaptation of Isaac Asimov's Little Lost Robot. ABC wiped the entire series from its archives, but this episode survived as a 35mm film negative. A complete audio recording of Cold Equations exists, as does an incomplete audio recording of Imposter, missing about 16 minutes of audio, mainly from the middle section. How does the sole surviving play and its faceless counterparts hold up today? Well, thanks to the excellent British Film Institute's excellent DVD release, that's what I'm here for. Right off the bat, the DVD presents you with a really cool option of watching the vidFire restored version or the 2K scan of the 35mm film negative. I like a fine choice as an archive enthusiast. The vidFire option basically recreates the interlaced video look that audiences would have seen in 1962, which was 405-line videotape, which, in actuality, only had about 377 lines, roughly a third of the high definition we have today. The vidFire version basically makes it look like a studio-bound Doctor Who episode, whereas the film version, in my opinion, looks a little bit cleaner, seeing as it was presumably recorded straight onto film from the videotape monitors in the studio. Adapted by Leo Lehman, Little Lost Robot, considered to be one of Asimov's seminal pieces of robot fiction, marks the first ever on-screen depiction of Asimov's character Susan Calvin, portrayed by the excellent Maxine Audley. For those of you unfamiliar with the story, and there are a few changes from script to screen, it's set at Hyperbase 7, a military research station on an asteroid orbiting Saturn trying to develop the hyperspace drive, although it's taken them about 20 years. When one of the scientists, Gerald Black, loses his temper and tells one of the robots, NS2, or Nestor 10, to literally get lost, it obeys the order and becomes lost amongst 20 other identical robots due to be delivered to Hyperbase 41. They now know where it is, but they don't know which one is which, as they're all completely identical and have had their serial numbers scratched off. NS2 is special because it was involved in training that now allows it to detect gamma rays none fatal to humans but fatal to robots, and it's also had part of the first law of robots stripped from its databank. In the TV version, they don't really explain why as clearly, but in the short story it's made pretty obvious. For those of you unfamiliar, Asimov's 3 laws of robotics are as follows. 1. A robot may not injure a human being or, through an action, allow a human being to come to harm. 2. A robot must obey orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And 3. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Although the robot cannot harm a human, it can allow a human being to be harmed, and fearing the hysteria that will follow if the general public who are still afraid of robots find out, they must find it. Naturally, Calvin, being a robot psychologist, is outraged. Tackling the Frankenstein complex, Calvin adds further urgency because she believes that the robot could directly harm or even kill a person if it finds a loophole that technically doesn't break the first part of the first law, such as dropping a weight on a person with the expectation that they would survive because they could have grabbed it. Now Calvin has to find the robot amongst a room without any serial numbers, otherwise all 21 robots will be destroyed and the project will be doomed. Calvin doesn't care much for the project or humans, but instead cares about the lost robot. She's very detached from the flesh, you could say. When all robots are interviewed separately, it leads down a blind alley. She gets an idea to put someone in danger using a weight, expecting all but one robot to move.
Remarkable woman. Wish we had more time.
They all move, and Calvin fears that Black is right when he says the robot has a darker personality than it lets on. Calvin fears that the robot is gaining a superiority complex that will allow it to become intelligent enough to completely break the first law and kill someone directly as it watches and plays with them from the crowd. Calvin sets up another trap where a high voltage cable fatal to robots is separating the man from the robots as the weight is dropped. All robots know that they must protect the man in compliance with the third law except the robot they're after.
Not one of them moved. Have you checked the infront?
Calvin decides to interview them again one by one in a separate room. They all give the same answers to the same questions, having banded together and come up with their own reasoning that there would be no point in both the robot and the man dying if they moved to save him. Unfortunately, not one of them reveals which robot came up with the idea, claiming not to know. One of the 15 interviewed was lying. A small alteration has caused a whole group frenzy amongst the positronic brains. To make matters worse, the robot has shown signs it's taking control and is trying to escape. Calvin still has one more idea, but they catch the robot spying on them, and it somehow escapes despite being 11 times slower than two running human beings, which I thought was kind of funny.
We've lost him. He's got back with the others again.
Calvin decides to put herself in the trap with a new idea. Using the lost robot's own logic against it, she ensures that the robots understand that if there is any gamma radiation fatal to robots between herself and the robots, they would be unable to save her even if they tried because they would destroy themselves. If the robots apply the logic that they have learned, they will not move to save her. Her bravery compared to the grown men around her being scared of the robots is admirable, as she avoids having a bias against them like everyone else does, and the way it affects her is noticeable. Instead of turning the gamma ray on, she tells the crew to turn on the normal beam. Once the test is run, only the Nesta robot they are looking for makes a move to save her. All of the other robots cannot identify what type of radiation is being used because it is not part of their design, whereas the modified NS2 had been through training at the hyperbase and had learned how to detect the difference in radiation types.
I have obeyed, disobeyed, I have been found out.
It's all right, Nesta. I'm your friend.
In the original story, it explains that the only way to prove itself better than a human is by never being found, and it tries to attack Dr. Calvin so that she cannot reveal she found the robot. Black and Boga apply gamma rays on the robot, destroying it before it can harm her. In the televised version, the robot kills Black for being an asshole and interrupting Calvin before it is destroyed by the gamma ray. Calvin feels bad for luring the robot to its death and apologizes to its corpse, although there is a slightly dark implication that it may not have been the robot they were looking for. Before Calvin leaves, she gives the general this important thing to ponder on.
Peter, how simple life must be for mathematicians and generals. The modified Nesta has paid the price of your modification. But you have sent into space to accomplish for you that great and most secret project. 20 robots who have witnessed the first recorded murder of a human being by a robot. the first act of mechanical evil. And remember this, robots have electronic memories. They cannot forget.
From a technical standpoint, the play looks pretty good. The costumes and set design in particular are pretty great and perfectly capture the 60s equivalent of a technologically advanced space station. It's slightly surreal in a way, but given the modest budget and time, it's pretty good. The robot costumes, however, are so impractical, cheap, and bizarre that I love them. It's a shame they didn't have enough money or studio space to create the whole 62 like in the original short story, but it's still pretty cool. The score, which I'm pretty sure is all just stock music, is really creepy and makes a nice atmosphere. The script is pretty good. There's some really funny lines and it captures the intellect of Asimov's story without sacrificing any of his poignant themes and ideas in favour of more mindless entertainment. The performances are especially brilliant, particularly Maxine Audley, who delivers her character's lines with such sharpness, sass, and seriousness that she completely steals the show. The other actors are great, but she is impeccable, and her character is a lot of fun to watch. Her empathy for robots is quite touching, and Audley sells it perfectly. How she can like or love something so hideous, though, is truly beyond me. A cute detail was that the General grows his own flowers on the ship. There's the occasional boom mic visibility and clear issues the actors have moving around in the really constrictive costumes, but you can forgive these because of the age of the play. In regards to the audio episodes, Cold Equations and Imposter, well, one is incomplete, and on top of that, there are no visuals. No shooting script screenshots, no still photographs, no subtitles, just a black screen with audio that's pretty low quality. If one views them as radio plays, it's pretty easy to listen to. Set in 2178, Cold Equations, based on the short story by Tom Godwin, is a gut-wrenching sci-fi tragedy about an 18-year-old girl called Marilyn Lee Cross, who stows away on an emergency dispatch ship being piloted by a man named Barton, delivering very important medical equipment to a 6-man group on the western frontier of the planet Woden. By law, all EDS stowaways are to be jettisoned because an EDS carries only enough fuel to reach its destination with no turning ground, and any excess weight depletes the fuel immediately. Marilyn, a resident of the Stardust cruiser, wanted merely to visit her brother Jerry on the remote planet and was unaware of the law or the danger that comes with the job. When she saw the "Unauthorized personnel keep out" sign while she was sneaking around on board, Barton sadly explains to her that her additional weight would make it impossible to land safely. They would crash on the planet, killing both of them and the colonists needing the medicine. Barton also cannot sacrifice his own life to save Marilyn since she would not know how to pilot the ship. After recovering from her shock and horror and contacting Jerry, Marilyn willingly climbs into the airlock and is ejected into space. The script for this play in particular is excellent, with Barton's rage gradually turning into the remorseful tone of a man who really doesn't want to do what he knows he has to. Marilyn's reflection of her life up to her death is genuinely touching and pretty sad, and the performances, while lacking visual elements, are excellent from Peter Wingard and Jane Asher. There are a few other characters featured in the play, namely crew on board the Stardust and the crew on Woden, including Jerry, who has a very touching conversation with his sister just in the nick of time. As with Little Lost Robot, I really like the soundtrack. The story's tackling of being forced to accept an unfortunate fate that you weren't expecting and the difficult choice that comes with it is brilliant. It's ultimately a tragedy that the full episode didn't survive. The story was adapted as an episode of the 1985 revival of The Twilight Zone, but has otherwise largely been forgotten by adapters. Imposter is based on the short story by Philip K. Dick. The audio for this one is higher quality, but as mentioned before, it's incomplete. In this story, Spencer Olham, renamed Roger Carter for the television version for, I guess, ethnicity reasons? I don't really know, is accused by Major Peters of being an android imposter containing a liquid U-bomb sent by an alien race known as the Outer Spacers, very creative, sent to destroy Earth's defenses with the use of a special voice command code. Convinced of his humanity, Carter, not really willing to be cut open and studied for scientific reasons, escapes captivity and returns to Earth, but the space agents are hot on his trail. Even his wife is convinced and helps them ambush him. When he meets up with his friend Jean, who has an unrequited attraction to Carter's, she convinces him that Major Peters may actually be the imposter, so he sets off to find the crashed rocket. While chunks of the story's middle are missing, the ending survives. Carter finds the ship where he and his colleagues discover a bloody knife and a corpse before the android utters the words, "If I'm not Carter, then I must be," resulting in an explosion so large that it is visible to the outer spaces of Alpha Centauri. A very complex plot, but interesting. I'm especially disappointed that the play doesn't survive because Carter is played by John Carson, an incredible actor who starred in many old BBC shows back in the day, including Dombey and Son. I think it's a fascinating story because, although there's no real evidence because the android is such a perfect replica of Carter, the brutality and anger of Carter's colleagues and superiors is untested. It's a bitch the full audio doesn't exist because it sounds like it would have been worth seeing right to the end. There's an interesting sequence where Carter meets a native to the planet he's stationed on that helps him after he escapes captivity, even after he admits he designed the weapon that his colleagues are trying to use to win the war. Overall, based on what does exist, Out of This World was a very intelligent, slightly moody, very exciting anthology of science fiction stories that should have survived more. Despite being deemed a massive success, Out of This World did not return for a second series. It's commonly believed that Shubik and Newman departing ABC for the BBC during the show's broadcast contributed to the decision not to commission another series. The format did not die, however. Shubik went on to create Out of the Unknown, a very popular anthology series that ran for 4 series between 1965 and 1971, although it mutated from the science fiction format to a more fantasy-based series of supernatural psychological horror, with only one story from the final series revolving around science fiction, that being This Body Is Mine. Shubik did leave the role of show producer before Series 3 started airing, which may have also played a part in the format switch-up. Karloff did not return to host, and no actor took his place, leaving the series of plays largely unconnected beyond the title, although several Isaac Asimov stories were adapted, most of which are sadly lost. The script for The Yellow Pill, which Shubik presumably still had a copy of, was also readapted as an episode of the series, although only an audio recording of this episode survives as well. The heavy debt that Out of the Unknown owes to Out of This World is clear even with both of their minimal surviving episodes, and the rich history behind the show is fascinating to learn about. If it wasn't for shows like this, we probably wouldn't have as strong of a fascination with the future and technology as we do now when it comes to mainstream media. Also, if you're interested, there's an amateurly colorized version of Little Lost Robot on archive.org, but it isn't very high quality. If you really want a true experience, go and buy the DVD, read the booklet, and just enjoy yourself, because it's brilliant science fiction.